Welcome to Arsenal, where the weapons and war machines of military history come to life. Today, we explore the M4 Sherman in Normandy in 1944, and the crews and opponents who gave it its reputation. A longer version with fact sheets and photos is available in the print edition on LinkedIn or by email. You can find more articles, podcasts, and resources at trackpads.com. Our story opens in the hedgerows, where the countryside looks calm from a distance, but feels like a trap from inside a tank. Earthbanks and tangled brush divide the Normandy fields into cramped rooms of greenery, each one a possible killing ground. In July 1944, south of St. Lo, a company of M4 Shermans crawls down a sunken lane, steel tracks grinding over dust and stones. The lane is narrow and dark, a corridor that could hide a single anti-tank gun or an entire German platoon only a few yards away. 5 men share that space, working together in cramped heat and noise. The driver hunches over his controls at the front left, keeping the nose of the Sherman close to the right bank and searching for a gap that will not expose the thinner lower hull. Beside him, the bow gunner grips the hull machine gun and listens for threats the others cannot see, ready to pour fire into a hedge or a doorway at a moment's notice. Above them, in the turret, the gunner peers through his sight with one hand resting on the electric trigger for the 75mm main gun. The lane bends to the left, and the Sherman inches forward into the unknown. The radio crackles with a sudden warning from a tank ahead, but the message breaks off in mid-sentence. A white flash bursts from the hedgerow, followed by the sharp crack of a gun and the heavy thud of impact somewhere in front of them. Smoke drifts back along the lane, curling over the tank's hull and stinging the crew's eyes as they scramble to respond. This moment in the hedgerows is part of a much larger story about the M4 Sherman. The duel in this sunken lane is not the future American armored officers had in mind when they first discussed what kind of tank they needed. Before the landings in Normandy, their doctrine imagined something more fluid and open, with tanks sweeping across wide frontages and driving deep into enemy rear areas. A tank that could be everywhere the war demanded it. Early in the conflict, the United States Army tried to meet this need with the M3 Lee, a stopgap design that mounted its main gun in a sponson on the side of the hull. That arrangement gave useful firepower, but it left the tank with a high silhouette and limited the arc in which the main gun could be brought to bear. Crews found it awkward to fight and painfully easy to spot on the battlefield. Commanders and designers came to agree that they needed a more versatile machine. Industrial reality shaped every one of those ambitions. The new tank would have to fit on existing rail cars, through ship hatches, and onto landing craft ramps if it was ever going to reach distant fronts. It needed engines and components that American factories could produce quickly and in great volume, often by adapting designs from the civilian automotive world. Better something effective now than a dream machine that missed the war. The result of all this thinking was the concept that became the M4 Sherman. It was conceived as a standardized, adaptable medium tank that would serve as the armored backbone of American and Allied forces, not as a rare thoroughbred. It was never meant to be the heaviest or most powerful tank on the battlefield, but rather a machine that could be produced in huge numbers and sent wherever operations required. Its real purpose was to bring effective armor and firepower to distant theaters and then keep that steel moving once it arrived, day after day. The path from the awkward M3 Lee to the M4 Sherman moved quickly once those planners accepted that reality. Ordnance officers asked for a true medium tank with a fully rotating turret, a powertrain that could be trusted on long marches, and armor thick enough to stand up to the common anti-tank guns of the day. Engineers saved time by reusing what they could from the M3, the lower hull, much of the suspension,
and existing engine options carried over.
Industrial America answered that call with a web of plants that treated tanks almost like automobiles on an assembly line. The Detroit Arsenal tank plant became the symbol of this approach, but other factories joined in and contributed their own production runs. Each plant might build slightly different subvariants, yet all stayed within a common standard, so the Army did not end up with a dozen incompatible types. Casting and welding methods varied, as did engine choices, but the requirement remained that a crew trained on one Sherman could climb into another and feel at home. Seen at a glance, the M4 Sherman was a medium tank of the United States, serving primarily with the Army and the Marine Corps from 1942 onward. It carried a crew of 5, with the early versions mounting a 75mm main gun, a coaxial machine gun in the turret, and another in the hull, plus a heavy machine gun often fitted on the turret roof. On roads, it could make roughly 20 to 25 miles per hour when conditions allowed, and its fuel capacity and mechanics gave it a range suitable for the long operational marches the war demanded, as long as supply lines kept up.
Climbing onto a Sherman for the first time, many visitors notice its shape before anything else. The hull is compact and rounded, carrying a tall turret that seems almost friendly compared to the sharp edges of some other tanks. The glacis plate, the main front armor, slopes back from the bow machine gun position up toward the driver and bow gunner hatches, giving the front a smooth, slanting look. On top, the turret sits slightly forward of center, its rounded sides housing the main gun and 3 of the 5 crewmen in a tight but workable space.
Inside the hull, the driver sits at the front left, hands gripping levers and feet working pedals that demand strength and practice rather than a light touch. To his right, the bow gunner manages the hull machine gun and, in many variants, the radio set that ties the tank into its platoon and company. He acts as an extra set of eyes and ears in the chaos of combat, scanning through his limited viewports and listening for anything the others might miss. Behind them, beneath the turret basket, ammunition racks line the sides and floor of the fighting compartment. In the turret, the human machine becomes even more tightly packed. The commander stands or crouches under his hatch, trying to maintain a full circle view of the battlefield while also directing the gunner and loader. The gunner sits to the front right of the turret, eye pressed to the sight, one hand on the elevation and traverse controls and the other ready on the trigger for the main gun. The loader works to the left of the gun, hauling heavy shells from racks into the breech, slamming them home, and then clearing spent cases while keeping careful track of which ammunition types remain. Everywhere inside and out, subsystems support specific human tasks. The main gun and its stabilizer promise a better chance of hitting a target while the tank is moving, helping gunners keep the sight roughly on line as the hull bounces. Even with that help, many crews choose to halt before firing when they can, trading a little time for better accuracy. Armor thickness changes across the hull and turret, with the front offering the best protection and the sides and rear more vulnerable. Inside, details like heaters, ventilators, and stowage for personal gear show that designers and planners tried to make life in the tank at least bearable. Those touches matter during long days and nights when crews live in their machines, but they do not erase the strain. After hours on the move or in combat, men climb out exhausted, coated in dust, sweat, and fumes from fuel and gunpowder. Crews learn quickly where its promise holds true and where its limitations bite, and those lessons stay with them every time they climb back inside and slam the hatches shut. Those lessons about the Sherman's character become brutally clear once it meets combat in its most famous setting, Normandy in 1944. The sunken lane where our tank inches forward is just one small piece of a much larger struggle to break out of the bocage and open France. In July, American armored divisions and independent tank battalions push towards St. Lo and beyond, trying to punch holes in a German defense
that has turned every hedgerow into a miniature fortress. Every field gained carries a cost in steel and lives.
By the time these Shermans nose past French farmhouses, the type already has serious combat history behind it. Its first major battles come with British and Commonwealth units in North Africa, where it enters the line in late 1942, around the Second Battle of El Alamein. There it gives Allied forces a more modern medium tank with a powerful gun and decent protection for the first time in that theater. In Tunisia and later in Italy, American crews learn to march long distances, coordinate their moves with artillery and air power, and work around early mechanical and tactical problems.
In the hedgerows, the fight looks nothing like the open desert. A Sherman company may advance only a few hundred yards in a long day, blasting gaps through earth banks and taking fire from hidden anti-tank guns, handheld rocket weapons, and the occasional German tank covering a carefully chosen lane of fire. At close ranges, the advantages of good radios, a quick turret traverse, and a solid high explosive shell matter as much as pure armor thickness. Commanders call for smoke to blind enemy gunners, for artillery to pound suspected gun pits, and for engineers to blow lanes through the hedgerows.
Yet, when the plan comes together, the M4 does exactly what it was meant to do. In one typical attack, a platoon's fire smashes a farmhouse that anchors a German strongpoint, while infantry cling to the decks, ready to rush forward. The tanks then lurch through a gap in the bank, crush fences and garden plots, and carry the assault right up to the next hedgerow. Within hours, a crossroads that anchored the enemy line is in Allied hands. Losses are real, with burned-out hulls in the fields and stretcher cases on the verges, but the front has moved.
When Sherman crews talk about what they liked most, many start with the same points. The tank usually starts, usually moves, and is rarely out of action for long if there are spare parts and mechanics nearby. Its relatively roomy interior, compared to some rivals, gives the crew room to work, and its good optics and fast turret traverse give gunners a real chance to get the first effective shot off in a sudden encounter. The 75mm gun of the early and mid-war years offers a flexible mix of armor-piercing and high-explosive ammunition, letting the same tank engage enemy infantry, gun positions, and lighter armor without changing vehicles.
The weaknesses weigh heavily, too, especially as the war grinds into its later stages. The tank's high silhouette makes it easier to spot and hit than some lower rivals, and early ammunition stowage arrangements mean that penetrations often lead to catastrophic fires. Crews see tanks brew up in seconds when enemy rounds punch through and ignite propellant or fuel, and they remember that sight more vividly than any chart of armor thickness. Later, wet stowage racks, which surround shells with water jackets, greatly reduce the risk of such fires, but stories about the Sherman's tendency to burn linger in the ranks.
Enemies develop their own views of the Sherman, and those opinions shape tactics on both sides. German accounts often dismiss it as inferior in protection and individual firepower when compared tank for tank with their best types. At the same time, they respect its numbers, its mobility, and the Allied ability to keep fleets of them fueled, repaired, and supplied. On the Eastern Front, Soviet crews who receive Lend-Lease Shermans frequently praise its reliability, its radios, and its main gun, which they view as accurate and effective.
Because the Sherman is designed as a standard pattern rather than a single rigid model, it evolves rapidly as the war goes on. Different hull types, engine installations, and small detail changes flow from American factories and Allied workshops, while the tank keeps its basic look and five-man crew. Early M4s with 75mm guns are joined by versions carrying a higher velocity 76mm weapon that offers better armor penetration against later German designs. Other hulls trade welded construction for large cast shapes or composite combinations that mix both methods, juggling armor forms and production capacity.
Specialized roles drive further change and produce some of the Sherman's most distinctive variants. Assault gun versions mount a 105mm howitzer in the turret to provide direct, heavy, high-explosive fire against bunkers and strongpoints, sacrificing some anti-tank punch for better infantry support. A heavily armored jumbo assault version adds significant frontal protection so that it can lead advances into well-defended positions, shrugging off hits that would cripple a standard model, even though that extra armor costs speed. Allied partners push the design in their own directions as well. British engineers create the Sherman Firefly by fitting a powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun into a modified turret, giving Commonwealth units a much better answer to German heavy armor while still relying on ordinary Shermans for most tasks. Other variants turn the M4 into an amphibious DD swimming tank for beach landings, its canvas screens and propellers letting it motor off landing craft toward shore. Mine-clearing crab versions swing flails ahead of the hull to detonate buried charges before the tracks roll over them. Still others become dozers, recovery vehicles, and specialized engineer platforms.
When the guns finally fall silent, the M4 Sherman has become more than just a wartime designation on factory paperwork. It is the face of Allied armor in countless photographs and newsreels, the tank most ordinary people picture when they think of the Western Front. After the war, it remains in service with the United States in Korea, and with many other nations into the 1950s and 1960s. Its shadow stretches forward in steel and doctrine. Today, the Sherman's legacy is visible in carefully preserved steel and fading paint at museums and memorials across the world. In Britain, an early M4A1, nicknamed Michael, stands at a major armor museum as one of the first examples delivered under Lend-Lease. For readers of Dispatch and followers of trackpads, the Sherman also lives on through photographs, walk-around videos, and interviews with veterans and museum staff who have spent years preserving these machines. Its story connects naturally to beyond-the-call profiles of actions where Shermans rumbled nearby, even if the medal citations focus on the soldiers on foot.